Tonight we're at the home of the BBC National Orchestra of Wales in Cardiff. Welcome to Question Time. And good evening to you at home, good evening to our audience here and to our panel. Tonight, the Conservative Minister for the Cabinet Office and Paymaster General Francis Maude, Labour's Shadow Business Secretary Chuka Umunna, Plaid Cymru's leader Leanne, the leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats Kirsty and the multi-millionaire shopkeeper Theo Paphitis. And there are few shopkeepers you can say that about these days.
Tough times for shopkeepers.
What?
Tough times for shopkeepers.
Our first question from Carol Ivory, please.
Should Chris Huhne and Vicky Pryce have been given custodial sentences?
Should Chris Huhne and Vicky Pryce have been sent to prison? Chuka Umunna.
I'm very hesitant as a politician in substituting my view as to what the conviction should be in a case for that of a judge. We're legislators, and they are the ones who properly heard and appraised of all the facts in the case. I should say, I think what has happened here is deeply tragic and very sad, particularly for the family concerned. Actually, the family are constituents of mine, and the people that I really felt for were the children. Their children are going to have two parents who are in prison, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So I think it's a deeply, deeply tragic situation.
I don't understand why you can't answer the question there, because the Home Secretary is always criticising what judges say and asking for a review of it. Tory MP wants the sentence increased. All the politicians pitch in.
Well, look,
you must have a view on it.
I've criticised fellow parliamentarians for seeking to substitute their views as to what should happen in a case and abuse parliamentary privilege to do so, for example, over super injunctions, because I don't believe that's our proper role. I haven't heard all the facts of this case. I'm not aware of, in detail, of the sentencing guidelines. It wouldn't seem to me that it was a perverse judgment, but for me to sit here on this panel and dictate how many years or how many months they should get, I don't really think that's our role.
OK. The man in the middle there, what do you think?
I think Chris Huhne had a choice to make a long time ago. It's well known that he's, quite a well-off man. He's worth, quite a few thousands of millions of pounds. He had a choice a while back when he could have taken the flak for getting the points and getting a driving ban and had a driver for a year or however long.
What do you think about the prison sentence, which is the question that was asked?
The fact that he lied to the public over so long, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't be more glad with it.
Paphitis.
Well, it's a tragedy, isn't it? It's a tragedy for the family. First of all, I'm thinking two people go to prison, a husband and wife, for what they consider to be a white lie at the time. And then, of course, you look at it from the legal perspective, and you realise that it was quite a serious lie. And
apparently committed by 300,000 people, according to the AA.
Well, I'm going to come there. I'm going to come there, and it is quite a serious one because it's a perversion of the course of justice, and you start understanding why the judge took the decision he took, because this was such high profile. It went on for such a long time. It was denied for such a long time. What would have happened? What would have been the reaction if he just gave them a slap on the wrist and said, now stop being silly billies and go home and don't do it again? What would be the thought of the British public at that time? I think the view would have been, well, it's fine. We can all do it now. We can all lie. We can all break the law. And I think that's where the difficulty lay for the judge. So I sympathise totally with the family, and it is a tragedy. But I can understand why the judge took that decision.
OK. Anybody else got a view here? Yes, the gentleman there in the third row.
I sympathise with the family, but I think a lot of people will think twice about doing this crime anymore. So I think it has been the right decision. And if you're in public life, you've got to be purer than pure, okay? And you are an example. You are a role model to us. So if you've done something, you should be punished more than what we would be. So it is the right decision for everybody in the whole country.
And you, sir?
Yeah, I don't think there's enough politicians in jail, to be honest.
Francis Maude.
Well, I mean, on the simple question, should they've been sent to prison, there's a tariff for offences like this, and realistically, the judge would have had absolutely no option. There could be no possibility of the judge giving these two people in this very high-profile affair a lesser sentence. So I don't see any option there. I think two other reflections. One is there's an old Chinese saying, when you embark on revenge, first dig 2 graves. There's a terrible, terrible tragedy here. Second reflection is the damage to the family, and no one who's a parent could have read those text messages between children and father without shrivelling up inside. It was devastating.
Kirsty Williams.
Well, like Chuka, I think it's you have to be very careful as politicians when you try and second-guess what the judiciary have done. They heard the evidence. There is a tariff associated with prosecuting and being found guilty of crimes of these types, and it was inevitable, I believe, that they would go to prison. Chris Huhne did a very stupid thing for which he has apologised. He and his wife, who had brilliant careers, have paid a heavy price, not just the time they will serve in prison, but a heavy, heavy price. But I think the biggest price they will pay, as everybody's alluded to, is the tearing apart of their family. And I think that will last a lot longer and will be the subject of much more reflection than simply the time that they will spend in prison.
Should he apologise to your party?
Well, he has apologised.
Has he damaged you?
Well, what was interesting, because I was down at the by-election, and what was interesting, whilst constituents there were, less than happy about what had happened, they all agreed that he had been a good MP, and they felt very sorrowful, actually, that a good MP had made such a stupid mistake.
Can I pick up on what the guy said earlier? I mean, shouldn't politicians, I think the words you used were whiter than white, I mean, they stand to be an example. Can we possibly allow politicians to be so blatant in breaking the law, lying to the public, and you say he was a good MP? I mean, blatantly not.
His constituents, and I talked to very many of them, are on the doorstep.
How do they know?
Well, because he had done casework, they felt that he had represented them well. He did a stupid thing, he committed a crime, he is paying the price for that crime, and I don't expect the judge to have done everything else. But his constituents
I don't want to pick on him. It's unfair to pick on him, but I'm just saying, generally, as politicians, we expect a very incredibly high standard.
Of what? Of what?
Of morality, of honesty.
Because we attack them all the time for their policies.
Well, honesty would be a great thing to start with. I'm happy to start with that one, because then we can talk about policies afterwards. But if you can't trust their honesty, then the policies are irrelevant.
OK. Man there on the right. Man there in grey, and then I come to the lady in red here at the front.
There are an awful lot of people offering an awful lot of sympathy. But at the end of the day, they've broken the law, and they've had to pay for it.
OK. And the lady there? Yes.
I think the punishment was too harsh. I think this obsession we have that our politicians have to be some sort of saints is just not fair. They're human beings like everybody else. I do think he lied and lied and lied, and he really believed he would get away with it. But he did not commit perjury. I think we would have been better off if they got £1 million plus fine each and been made to pay their court costs. But sending them to prison, I don't think that serves anybody.
But Leanne,
well, I think the initial offence wasn't on the most serious end of offences, but it's what happened afterwards. It was the lying, and it's the.
So, which offence? You mean the offence of putting the wrong name on the bit of paper?
Yeah, the initial.
That's what he was sent to jail for.
Offence.
The speeding itself.
Yeah, that was.
What about swapping the points? Was that, in your view, is that a trivial matter?
No, I don't think that's a trivial matter.
Is that a matter worth sending somebody to jail for?
in general, I would say that there are far too many people in prison for
Do you mean they shouldn't
minor
be,
offences.
So if they'd just said, yes, we
But-
did it, they shouldn't have been sent to jail?
Well,
if they'd fessed up straight away?
If it was just for the initial offence, then probably not. But given what has happened subsequently and the constant lie-in about it, then I think that is different.
Right.
And I think it does seem like a heavy sentence, and I do agree with the points that have been made about the family. Reading those text messages from between the son and the father was very, very sad. But, you know, the offence is serious. It's, what was it? Was it pervert the course of justice? Anybody else in court on a charge of perverting the course of justice would go to prison, and so it's only fair and consistent that they do too.
Chuka,
I think...
you wanted to make a point.
Well, I mean, I think, picking on with Theo's point, I think the issue here was that he lied to the very last moment. And I think in respect to Vicky Price's situation, that she put in the plea of not guilty. And I think those were the two aggravating parts of this, which meant that they were more than likely going to have custodial sentences.
OK. Just before we leave it, Francis Maude, since you're on this programme tonight, Jonathan Aitken said of going to prison, yes, that it was hard, but not as hard as being on Question Time as a minister of the government.
Well, I've only experienced the second of those, so I can't comment.
We hope you don't come to experience the first. You can. I would just say you can join in tonight's debate, as you well know, if you like doing that, and with the argument either texting us or on Twitter, our hashtag BBCQT. Tonight, Ruth Porter from the Institute of Economic Affairs is our Twitter panellist, and she's at BBC Extra Guest. You can follow her there with her trenchant comments and holding our panel's feet to the fire. Or you can text your comments to 83981, and the red button will tell you what others are saying. Jason Howells, please. Let's move on. Jason Howells.
If you were to pitch to George Osborne in the Dragon's Den, what would be your business plan to grow the economy?
Theo Paphitis, you were, of course, one of the dragons, if that's the right way of putting it. And put your money where your mouth was, I gather. So what would your business plan that you'd put to Osborne be to grow the economy, given the economy shows very little sign of doing that?
Well, the economy requires investment. There's no question about that. And jobs. Jobs for me has always been the key thing. If people got work, they've got confidence, they spend money, they recycle money, they're not on the state, we don't need as much money. So we've got to maintain jobs. But cutbacks are important. We lived way above our means for a long time. But at the same time, we've got to be careful how we make those cutbacks. I remember reading part of the manifesto, the Tory manifesto, not all of it. I fell asleep halfway through, but the theory on the economy actually made a lot of sense. I think my biggest argument with it is it's not been executed properly.
So where's it gone wrong?
Well, we haven't been able to actually create the jobs and create the growth within the private sector, and the reason for that is something that I've talked about many, many times, is the lack of investment. And the lack of investment by small businesses, large businesses and the government. Small businesses haven't been able to do it. Why? Because they can't borrow any money. And there's no point talking about the government yakking on about we've told the banks to do this, we've told the banks to do that. They're not lending any money. Fact. Secondly, big businesses are saying, oh dear, we're going to hold on to our cash, we're uncertain, we don't know what to do. The corporate balance sheet has got more cash in it today than it ever has in the history of statistics.
Are you playing your part in all this? Are you spending, investing?
Strangely enough, I've invested, listen to this, over the last 2 years, over £15 million in retail businesses.
So how have you been able to do
over
it?
2,500, creating and preserving 2,500 jobs. So I put my money where my mouth is.
But how have you been able to do it and nobody else?
That, I'm afraid, is a lot simpler than you think. The fact is, I didn't need to go to a bank to borrow the money. That's the reason.
Right, Francis Maude. So, well, we'll come back to your advice. Francis Maude, well, OK, you've got to pitch to the Chancellor, all right?
Well, I haven't got much time left to do it.
You've got 6 days.
Yeah, well, that's plenty.
Well, every day people are coming up with new ideas. What would yours be?
I would say keep investing in infrastructure, and we have, to the greatest extent possible, we've kept the same level, in fact, slightly increased the level of capital expenditure above the level that Alistair Darling had left in place in the plans, because you need good infrastructure. What we need is Britain to be a fabulous place to do business, and you need good infrastructure. You need schools that are really turning out children who are really qualified.
Are you worried by the way things are going at the moment?
I would like to need schools that are really turning out children who are really qualified.
Are you worried by the way things are going at the moment?
I would like the economy to be growing faster.
Are you alarmed at the way things are going?
There are some really good things happening. We're creating a lot of jobs.
Overall, are you alarmed or are you pleased?
I would like it to be better. For heaven's sake, it's not. The economy has been relatively flat.
Not what you expected when you came into power?
Well, it's not what anyone expected. It's not what the forecasters forecast.
Really?
The Eurozone, yeah, absolutely. The Eurozone has been much more sluggish. The global economy has been more sluggish than was expected. It's been a much tougher environment. We've cut corporation taxes, which are really important, so we have a competitive tax base.
Do you want to see them cut more?
I'd like to see us continuing to try to have the most competitive tax base we can, so that actually when people are looking for where do I put my ideas, my energy, my investment to work, to do what Theo does, actually to say, to look to Britain as being the place where you want to create the jobs and you want to create the wealth. You know, so support manufacturing. I mean, it's great that we are now exporting more motor cars than we've done at any time since the 70s. That's good.
But manufacturing's falling.
We're the second biggest manufacturer in aerospace after the United States. That's little known. That's very advanced, high-end manufacturing. So there's lots of things. Keep the jobs coming. I mean, Theo talked about creating and preserving jobs. Well, there are 1 million new jobs, extra jobs in the private sector since the election. And so there are some good things happening. Why does it feel so bad to
people then, if all these wonderful things are going on?
Well, because the economy has remained very flat. Our main trading
People are getting poorer all the time.
Our main trading partner is the Eurozone, and that's been in a state of almost continuous crisis for the last several years, and that hasn't pulled out, and we hope that it will do soon.
Okay.
We're increasing our exports to countries outside, to the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China.
All right.
In all of those, our exports, we've been investing heavily as a government in supporting sales and exports to those countries.
People
and that's good, but it's from a very, very low base.
Okay.
And we absolutely know that families are finding it really tough, so we're doing what we can to keep the cost of living down by not going ahead with Labour's increases in fuel duty, for example, by freezing council tax where we can, by cutting capping the rail increases, and all of those things make some contribution, but it's not at all to say that anyone's having a comfortable time. They're really not, and we need to do better.
So that's his advice. What would your advice be? Do you think he'd given the right advice to Osborne?
Well, I think it sounds remarkably complacent. I mean, look, the reality, the human reality of the situation is in my own constituency, long-term unemployment has quadrupled for adults. Even in Francis's constituency, it has doubled in the last year, long-term adult employment. And the fact is we've still got 2.5 million people out of work. Francis talked about manufacturing. The manufacturing statistics we got this week were dreadfully worrying. He talked about capital investment. We know that the capital investment the government made in the first 3 years of this government came in £12.8 billion lower than was planned under Alistair Darling's plan. And we've got a very urgent situation. And why has this happened? It's happened because as soon as the government announced its comprehensive spending review in October 2010, it sucked all the confidence out of the economy and demand fell. And that is
saying, though, that
one moment. Let me.
Alistair Darling said that he would cut faster and deeper than Margaret Thatcher did.
Well,
he said that, didn't he? Are you rewriting history now?
One moment, because Francis's plan wasn't Margaret Thatcher's plan, but Alistair was going to. I don't deny that we were going to have to consolidate the public finances. All of the parties were going to have to do that. But the question was the pace at which you do that, and whether, if you do it so fast, you suck out demand from the economy so that people don't spend. And already, I mean, Theo's talked about, we've got small businesses who are suffering because people aren't placing orders with them. You've got a large corporate sector who are sitting on piles of cash. I don't deny the fact that there are some international factors which are going to have an effect with the Eurozone undoubtedly that's had an effect.
This is description. What are the measures that you would advise Osborne to take on Wednesday next?
Get the economy going again
well, that's
now.
Easy
and that
advice.
means,
what would you do?
That means
Just
that
like
you do things like you give a national insurance rate to micro businesses who are taking on extra workers. That is something that is supported by the Federation of Small Businesses. Yes, absolutely, you've got to bring forward infrastructure spending, which the government has completely failed to do. Give a temporary VAT cut to everybody. That will get them spending again,
Look,
and then we will see the economy moving. But can I just say one thing, David? We do not do this debate justice if we let it become ossified simply around what we will tax and what we will spend. Because actually, the bigger question coming out of the 2008-9 crash is actually how do we build a different model? How do we grow the different sectors of our economy so we aren't, for example, so reliant on the financial services sector, and so that we also have growth more evenly balanced across the geography of the UK, and also so that we're growing those sectors which can feed those emerging market economies in the south and the east. And that means things like having a proper industrial strategy and a
right? You're saying some great things, but it is a fact that had Alistair Darling had his way, £3.5 billion would have been cut from the Welsh Block grant, and that would have seen thousands more jobs being lost than we've lost already.
With the greatest of respect,
50,000 more people unemployed in Wales now than there were before the start of this recession.
Yes, that's now. With the greatest of respect, in May 2010, after the financial crash, which found its gestation in the banks, when we left government, unemployment was falling, growth was returning, and stability was settling in.
In your view, it would all have been fine. Let's go. We're now here where we are, and we're talking about the next budget, and a lot of people want to ask questions about it, so I'm going to go to the woman there in blue, and then I come to you beside her. Yes?
Yeah, I don't know why everyone, especially Francis Maude, is grabbling around for pennies with things like infrastructure and benefits and things, when you're just totally ignoring tax avoidance and the billions that you could get from that.
Okay.
In little over 2.5 weeks, the entire of the welfare system is going to be changed, and to encourage people to go into jobs that don't exist. How is the economy going to support all these people that are supposed to be taken off benefits with them being reduced when there is nowhere for them to go, for them to earn money?
Where did these million extra jobs come from? I mean, these are new jobs. There are a million more people employed in the private sector than was the case before.
You've got record numbers of people in part-time work. What people want is full-time work, Francis.
And we're reforming the system, Chuka, so that actually it will pay people for the first time to move from part-time to work.
All right, I want to get back to the audience.
Under the system you left,
the man in the third row from the back.
It actually penalises people.
The man in the third row from the back there.
What I'd like to know, Vince Cable has come out this week recommending that the government should change their mind and borrow more money to spend on infrastructure projects because it's such a low rate of interest at the moment in time. The thing that puzzles me is, where does all this money come from that we can borrow? Who has it? And how did they get it?
All right. And Kirsty Williams, you can answer that for the Liberal Democrats. Where's the money he wants to borrow coming from?
Well, actually, what Vince said was that there was a balance to be struck. And actually, in the autumn statement, we did see the government announce an extra £5 billion worth above and beyond what had already been announced for infrastructure investment. But we've got to be realistic, like you say. Where is this money coming from? And what's really important, and what we've not been good enough at doing so far, is persuading the people who have got resources, and there is a lot of money held out.
Theo Paphitis cannot support you as a government.
Of course he can. Not even I can do that.
Of course Theo can, but there are people...
How stupid is that to say something like that?
But there are people like Theo, across the country that have got resources, but they have not got the confidence. They haven't got the confidence to invest. And it's up to the government. It's up to the government to create an environment where these people who are sitting on the reserves that they've got are feeling confident.
These people are the big corporates. It's not the people like me. It's the big corporates.
It's China. It's countries.
Well, let me just say to you,
off China.
Their problem is they haven't got the confidence to invest at the moment because they can't see the growth and the profits coming back in the short term, and so they're holding on to the cash. The important thing for us is to give them the confidence that the economy is well managed, and by investing today, it's not going to be wasted cash. And that's got to be led from government, and by the government leading, by making those first investments, not just in infrastructure projects, which everyone keeps talking about, because they normally cost money to maintain, so they become a liability. We're talking about investing in projects that generate jobs, generate income, and sustainable. And that's our biggest
like what, in your view?
We're talking about new railway lines that actually allow the rest of the country
HS2,
yeah, to participate in the wealth of the South. And the wealth
and electrifying the railway line to Cardiff.
Swansea. All the way to Swansea. All the way to Swansea.
Though, one of the things that business does need is policy certainty to invest. And if the policy environment keeps changing, then people aren't going to have the confidence to invest, is what people are saying to me. Say if you look at the department that I shadow, you've got Vince Cable, who is saying one thing about the government's economic strategy and its policies, and then you've got his deputy, the Conservative, Michael Fallon, saying something completely different. And business are thinking, well, who on earth do we speak to find out what the policy...
But do we think you guys are going to be any better if you get in? That's the worry, because you said something different as well.
At least, though, Theo, at least my side at the moment are talking all with one voice. Granted, under Blair and Brown, things were sometimes
Listen, when you're not in power, you can say whatever you want to get a vote.
But the thing is, you do need some degree of certainty. You'd agree with that?
All right,
surely?
I definitely agree. The man in the brown jacket there.
We don't need the Labour's prescription of trying to solve the problems of borrowing and debt by spending and borrowing and creating more debt.
Borrowing's going up, Francis, under your government.
You, sir.
What I'd like to say is I'm a Cardiff boy, and I've started my business back in 1991 with £20, and now I have a business here in Wales which turns over more than 100 million. And I have 3 factories in the Far East. And what I seem to find with the politicians, we have career politicians who haven't really worked in the real economy. And what we need in the government is people like Theo, who work in the government, who work in the real economy, and can really energize our economy to go forward.
Stand for election.
I would also like to add, in the world economy, we're finding prices of the fuel keeps on going up. So I'm shipping thousands of containers from the Far East, from my factories, into the UK. This is the sad thing. I'm taking wheat from Canada, taking it to Bangladesh, processing it, making it bread, and selling it back to Canada. And that's what we're doing. But as the price of oil goes up, price of cost of shipping goes up, I'm now thinking of bringing my factories, some of them, back into the UK for production.
All right, just in a word, what would your advice to Osborne be, which was the question?
We all talk about the banks giving
You've only got 30 seconds, mate.
Well, my advice would be make life easier for the business, cut more taxes for the business, give incentives. So if businesses reinvest in capex, in more investment, creating jobs, they don't have to pay taxes.
Okay. The woman up there with spectacles on, third row from the back. Yes.
I think what we really need to look at as well is youth unemployment. Every single local authority in Wales is a youth unemployment hotspot at the moment, and youth unemployment across the UK is actually rising.
What would you want the Chancellor to do about that?
Well, I think there's lots of different things you can do, but I think you need to invest in young people, because I know that Plaid Cymru invested thousands and thousands of pounds in the Welsh budget recently into new apprenticeships, and I think giving young people the skills and the opportunities to actually do that is
Chuka
really,
says
really
that was
important.
the Welsh government, not Plaid Cymru.
It was in a Welsh government budget, which Plaid Cymru, I think, supported.
It was part of the deal that Plaid Cymru did with the Welsh government to get the budget through.
Okay, and the man next to you in the grey.
Francis Maude talks about these 1 million jobs in the private sector. I'd like to know where, because in Wales we're not seeing that investment. If you go down to some of our high streets, there's an abundance of empty shops, some of them up to about 25% empty. That's not coming to Wales.
Where are the new jobs?
Well, they're pretty much spread around the country. I mean, the point...
But not in Wales.
There's 50,000 more people unemployed now than there were before 2008, and 50,000 people are underemployed. So that's graduates working in chip shops, for example. That's since 2008.
Okay.
So that's not, the same doesn't apply in Wales.
Yes.
Conservative Party is at its best when it's boldest and maybe a step back on the great record over the years of the economic management which the Conservative Party has. Take a step back and trust the individual again. You trust the individual, you lower taxes, you put more money in the pocket, like Theo said earlier, money gets recycled, that encourages the entrepreneurship. Why not can't the Conservative Party in some ways revert the type?
Well, I mean, to pick up that point, I mean, it's a very attractive plea, and
revert to type.
And well, but what the type? I mean, you're talking about maybe the 1980s when we did cut taxes, but we cut taxes after we raised them, controlled public spending in order to deal with the deficit that the last Labour government had left. We're having to do the same thing now. What we're trying to do, and we're cutting deficit that the last Labour government had left. We're having to do the same thing now. What we're trying to do, and we're cutting spending wherever we can from the costs of government, so we don't hit, to the greatest extent possible, we don't hit the frontline services.
And that's
what my day job is. But what we're then doing is trying to ensure that we can cut taxes where it has most effect on growth, which is in creating the right tax environment where people like Theo and others think it's a good place to invest to create the jobs in the world.
There's a top rate of tax for those earning millions of pounds.
Chuka, yes, it is. We've cut corporation tax. We've got the most
the top rate of tax for those earning millions of pounds in this country.
One at a time.
There are 100,000 people in Wales that will not pay income tax because of the rising of the threshold. 100,000. And if you're on minimum wage, your income tax bill will have been halved. People on low wages are keeping more of their money in their pocket.
We do just have to deal with Chuka's point about the top rate of tax, because it is just worth making the point that the top rate of tax today is higher than it was throughout the 13 years of Labour government, except for 3 weeks at the end.
You've cut it. You've cut it. You've cut it. I've been a small business owner for 2.5 years now. The bank's only lent me 50%. The Bank of England is supposed to be passing money down through the banks to small businesses. I know for a fact they're still lending 50%. When is the government going to put pressure on the banks to pass that down to the
Just explain your position again, because I missed the very beginning.
Basically, I'm a small business owner. I've got a pure water window cleaning business. I had to borrow 50% from the bank. That's all they would lend me. And as far as I know, that's all the banks are lending now, when the Bank of England is supposed to be passing that through the banks.
What we're trying really hard to persuade the Welsh Government to do is to look at alternative methods of getting money into small businesses via different mechanisms such as credit unions, because for small micro businesses, of which we've got an awful lot in Wales, that's what we need. We need to get the capital into them, and we need alternative ways of doing it so we don't have to rely on the banks.
OK, Leanne, yes, you haven't had your shout.
I haven't had the opportunity to answer the initial question.
No, go on.
That'd be great. I think it makes more sense than anything to try and maximise the amount of money that you've got in the tax pot. And what I've said since I've been the leader of Plaid Cymru is that our priority is jobs. Job creation has to be the priority above all else. And I've put forward a Plan C for Cymru, an alternative to austerity, which is an alternative to the cuts, a package of job creation including home building, home energy efficiency programme, green manufacturing, funded by a mixture of borrowing, closing loopholes for tax avoidance, better public procurement, and invest in our pension funds in a way that better benefits.
Would you be borrowing more than the present government or coalition government, or less as a result of what the measures you're proposing?
Well, I think...
Are you a borrower or not?
I am a borrower, but I think there has to be other things as well.
borrowing.
There are things like cancellation of the Trident replacement programme, for example. That could net in £100,000. The closure of tax avoidance and evasion.
Overall, would you... The fetish is about borrowing, isn't it? Everybody talks about borrowing. Would you allow borrowing to rise to do the things that you say you want to do?
In the long run, the debt has to be reduced.
That doesn't answer my question.
That can only happen if you've got more people paying into the tax pot.
In the short run, would you increase borrowing or not?
I would be happy to increase borrowing, to
that's
increase
what I want
jobs.
to know. OK, we must move on to another question now, because otherwise we'll be on the economy until the end of time, as indeed we all will be. Christina Cummins.
by walking away from cross-party talks on Leveson, is David Cameron protecting the press whilst betraying the victims of press abuse?
Yeah, this extraordinary, well, not extraordinary necessarily, a story today of the cross-party talks breaking down. Francis Maude, what's going on?
Well, I mean, the cross-party talks made a lot of progress. There were compromises made. There was still a gap. What we were finding was that there was two important bills which were being used, being hijacked to try and get through amendments in the House of Lords, one of which was to create the Green Investment Bank, which is a really urgent thing. We want to get on with that. Actually, you reach a point when you realise that there's too big a gap.
Can we try and make this simple? So that
okay, well, what David Cameron is putting forward is a proposal which absolutely delivers the principles in the Leveson report, which would actually create a tough regulatory system, which would be underpinned by the law and would operate through the Royal Charter. And this is and we can get on and do this, and we get on and do this really quickly.
But what's the big issue? Why have the talks broken down, which seem to be going so well with Oliver Letwin's guidance?
Well, because you make a lot of progress, and then you reach a point when you look at the gap that remains, and the demands being made by other party leaders were such that it would have taken, in the Prime Minister's view, which I support, taken us over what he's called the Rubicon of full statutory regulation of the media and of the press. And, you know, the freedom of the press is an important part of, is a crucial underpinning of democracy.
Right.
And politicians and Parliament meddle with that, not at their peril, but at the peril of democracy. And I think he's absolutely right to say we're not going to take that step. Tough, independent regulation that genuinely ensures that the disgraceful things that happen don't happen again. That's what we want. And we want it quickly, and by this route we can get it.
Kirsty Williams, you were saying not true, not true, not true. The question is David Cameron protecting the press and betraying the victims of press abuse? Liberal Democrats were in these coalition talks and weren't told that they'd come to an end. What's your take on it? Do you think that the questioner asking whether he's protecting the press rather than the victims is right? What's going on?
I think the Prime Minister is very much in danger of looking at narrow political interest rather than doing the right thing. And Francis talks about having a strong free press. Of course that's important, of course it is, but it's got to be an accountable press as well, held to account for the bullying, harassment and some of the horrendous things that happened to innocent people. The kind of independence that David Cameron and Francis are talking about is an independent regulatory body that will allow the media to decide who sits on it. It's the same as giving the one rugby team the power to choose the referee and then to tell him what constitutes a foul or not. There's nothing independent about a regulatory body that allows the press to say who sits on it.
Wasn't he talking about a Royal Charter?
The Royal Charter... The Royal Charter is a good thing as long as it has statutory underpinning in law that makes sure that ministers don't interfere with it, that gives us some independence, and we need that regulatory board. We need the regulatory board to be chosen not by people in the media, to be truly independent. Because
so
if
you
they've
want
got
Parliament to be deciding how it's regulated? That is death to freedom of the press.
I want the ability. I don't want a situation where the Royal Charter is there at the whim of a single individual minister. I want a free press, but I want an accountable press so that the parents of Millie Dowler and Madeleine McCann and other people like them will never have to witness that happening to other families ever again.
You're saying that your argument is that the Conservative position is that the newspaper proprietors will choose the people just as they did. But he says this is not so. This surely is a matter of fact, not of argument. What's the answer?
The answer, look, I mean, I think first...
In your view?
I think, first of all, you've got to... I mean, we're talking about the technicals here. We've got to go back and revisit why we set this whole thing up in the first place. And that is because we have people in the media and the press in particular abusing their power. And never mind some of the celebrities, even politicians who've been affected, some of the everyday people who were affected and left absolutely defenceless by this. They are the people who we need to ensure that we protect from this. Now, previously, when we've known there's been a problem with the way the media operates, previously there have been 3 royal commissions on this, several select committee reports. This is since the 1940s, and every time people have advanced the argument that Francis have made, you can't do anything about this because of press freedom, let them get on and get their house in order, and they haven't, and they have not done that. So what we need to do is actually put in place a system that A, safeguards the independence of the press, secondly, ensures that it covers all of the press and you can't just opt out of it, and thirdly, is accessible and easy for anybody to use, particularly people who don't have all the money to get live.
So what's gone wrong with the negotiations? Where has it gone astray?
The problem is, this Royal Charter, that they have a complete aversion to underpinning this self-regulatory regime.
What does underpinning mean?
Statute.
I don't understand.
Well,
what does underpinning mean? You set up a Royal Charter like the BBC is run by a Royal Charter. We're broadcasting now by virtue of a Royal Charter.
What it means is
that underpinned by Parliament?
There'll be a self-regulatory body which will set a code and also ensure that it is enforced. What the regulations do, what the legislation does, is put it on a statutory footing so nobody can tamper with that arrangement, and also act as a backstop.
Parliament can interfere with it. That's the danger.
Francis,
don't you see that that's the danger?
Yes, but the problem with a Royal Charter is that actually a Royal Charter can be amended on the whim of any Privy Councillor, a bunch of Privy Councillors who are ministers.
Cut to the chase. Are you going to win this thing on Monday when they're going to have the vote? Or is Cameron going to be defeated? Or are we going to get the Royal Charter in the way he wants? Who's going to win?
Look, what we're going to do, tomorrow we will be tabling amendments to the Crime and Courts Bill to basically put in place a Royal Charter.
That's another subject altogether.
Just a moment. No.
You are going to put in place a Royal Charter.
If you'll let me finish my sentence, we will put down amendments to this bill to put in place a charter that is compliant with Leveson and is underpinned by statute. Look, I used to practice as a lawyer. Our lawyers, our judiciary, our doctors, people who operate in the advertising industry, they all are governed by a set of rules and regulations that are underpinned by statute, and it hasn't led to Armageddon.
Chuka, you're really beating about the bush. You're rambling on. I mean, all I wanted, and I've not...
I've actually just answered the question.
No, you haven't.
Yes, I have. I
have been on the wrong side of the press many times, and I've got the hump with many of them and picked up the phone and given them a blasting. They haven't changed the inaccuracies that I wanted them to change. Now, so I'm the last person to support them, I've got to be honest with you. But the fact remains, the last thing I want as a citizen is for politicians to be able to control the press, as much as I don't like them in some cases.
I agree with you.
You need to have free press.
I agree with you, but the problem...
are not capable of controlling them.
All right. Don't dance, I've got to bring it... Okay. Leanne, we know where you stand. Leanne, and then I come to you, sir, over there. Leanne.
The people who have been affected by the problems with the press are far from convinced that Cameron's proposals will do the trick. Now, I am concerned as well about the freedom of the press to report stories without interference from politicians. But the National Union of Journalists don't support Cameron's moves. They support the opposition amendments, which will be putting down on Monday, which my party members will be supporting. Or they've gone down, but they'll be debated on Monday, and my party will be supporting those. And I think that if there were any concerns from the National Union of Journalists about the freedom of speech, we would have heard about them, and my understanding is that they're not happy with going down the road that Cameron wants to go down.
You, sir.
If David Cameron were interested in narrow political benefit, surely he would be just bending over and doing whatever the victims of phone hacking wanted. There's not been anywhere near enough debate in this about whether what Lord Justice Leveson was proposing actually made sense. Lord Justice Leveson was complaining about a press that was out of control. Well, the only thing that's worse than that is a press that's under control. There were laws against phone hacking. There are laws to protect privacy in this country. It's not a problem of needing new laws. It's a problem of needing enforcement of those laws that is accessible to ordinary people.
So you go back before Leveson, really? You go back to the situation before?
I do some work in this field, and what's needed, in my view, would have been a simple tribunal-type system to enforce the laws that already exist.
What work do you do as a matter of interest? You're a lawyer or
yes,
you're a journalist? A lawyer.
But can I ask you a question? You're a lawyer. If we are capable, and we've got a constitutional, as lawyers, we've got a constitutional role in respect of our judiciary and the court system, if we're capable of operating independent of government, which is incredibly important, and with the Legal Services Board and the way the Solicitors Regulation Authority operates, that is underpinned by statute, but we're independent. Why can't you have a similar system for journalists? I don't understand that.
Okay.
Because practicing as a lawyer is a privilege.
I think being a journalist is a privilege.
No,
being a politician is a privilege.
well, with respect, that's where you're wrong. Practicing as a lawyer is a privilege. Most people can't do it. No, most people can't
Not
go
everyone
into...
can be a journalist.
Well, yes, because
everyone can be a journalist.
Journalism is simply
Exactly where
the
you're
exercise by profession of a right that all of us have. It's free speech.
And particularly now, everyone can be a journalist, because actually everyone can tweet or blog whenever they like.
I
don't do it myself.
Mainstream press.
The issue for me is, David Cameron said he would implement Leveson in full. And yet again, we have the Prime Minister on so many issues who keeps U-turning. So when you were saying, Theo, earlier about the economy about U-turn, Leveson U-turn, alcohol U-turn, this man is always turning, and we need a bit of consistency in this country so we can move forward and not waste money on big reviews like Leveson and then not act on them.
That's right.
Well, we are actually.
Right. Stephen Langdon, please. Stephen Langdon.
Now that Ian Duncan Smith has done a partial U-turn on the bedroom tax, do we think it should be scrapped altogether?
Now that Ian Duncan Smith has done a partial U-turn on bedroom tax, should it be scrapped altogether? Kirsty Williams.
Well, I'm very glad indeed that Ian Duncan Smith has made some of the amendments that he did earlier this week. And I think we're going to have to review very, very carefully the adequacy of the money the government's put in place so that local councils can help people that they feel need additional help. I do think, and I see it every day in my own constituency, that we do need to do something about the social housing sector, because there is a mismatch at the moment. We have long lists of people trying to get into social housing. We have people who can't afford private rents, families that are squashed together in inadequate housing, and then we do have people who are living with more space than perhaps they need, and we've got to find some way of balancing that.
Sorry to interrupt you. You're not in principle against the under-occupancy charge, as it was called, or the spare bedroom subsidy?
No, I'm not, because I think we do need to tackle this problem, but I'm very much in favour of the changes that have been made.
But once you start making changes, like military families, foster parents, isn't the temptation just to go on? What about teachers? What about people waiting to move? You know, there are all sorts of other...
Well, that's why the government...
If you're to be fair to people, don't you end up letting everybody...
Well, that's why the government has made money available, so that local decision makers in our councils who know the individual circumstances of the people that they're dealing with can then put targeted help in place, so that people that really need the extra help will be able to get it because this money has been made available. But at the same time as making these changes, that it is incumbent upon Westminster and it's incumbent upon the Welsh Government, because housing is devolved, is that we do an awful lot more to make sure that there is more social and affordable housing available.
But
we have failed in the past to do that, and we've got to retackle those efforts. We've been urging the government to invest in empty homes so we can bring those back into use and make more homes
because
available.
the question is about the spare bedroom, whatever you like to call it, subsidy or tax, depending on your politics. But as far as you're concerned, you're not against it in principle. You think he took the right decision in principle. I want to ask Leanne whether she agrees that the decision was right in principle.
No, I think the bedroom tax should be scrapped. I think it's one of the most unfair pieces of legislation that we've seen. It's simply...
What do you do about people who've got 2 or 3 or even 1 bedroom, 1 room that they don't use?
Should it be scrapped for people in private rented accommodation as well? Because at the moment there's a basic unfairness.
Give her a chance.
Well, one thing you could do for social housing in London, for example, is the MPs who live outside London could utilise the spare rooms in the social housing in London, and then you're solving 2 problems in one stroke.
What are they going to do with the £20,000 a year allowance they get for this?
Oh, well, they don't need it then.
I don't need it. That's a good idea.
Francis Maude.
Well, I mean, I think there's been a basic unfairness which this measure is addressing, which is that you can have tenants living next door to each other, one in social housing, one in private rented housing. the tenant in the social housing has been able to get the subsidy for the spare bedroom, and the tenant in the private rented house has not, and that's been that was the case.
Them to move out
that was
of
that was the case. Well, just to be clear, that was the case absolutely throughout the Labour government. They never sought to address that, and the truth is, we are having to do some difficult things because we inherited a massive deficit from Labour, and we're doing difficult things to deal with it.
Where's the house building programme?
Labour have opposed every single measure we've put in place to control spending and cut the deficit. Every single one.
You compare private rental with rental in social housing. Is it the case or not that it's easier to move in private rental from one place to another? If you don't get the subsidy, you can find a smaller property. But in council house rental, people find it very difficult to move, and the councils can't find them space.
Well, no, the truth
so it's not chalk and cheese.
No, but the reality is there are huge numbers of people who are actually overcrowded in social housing, who would actually welcome the chance to swap with people who've got spare bedrooms. So actually, there's no difficulty in getting people moving into bigger houses if others have to downsize.
You haven't got a clue, Francis. Look, I have got constituents. It's mean and cruel what you're doing. I have had constituents tell me...
Is there a single spending cut Labour has supported to deal with the deficit that you left?
I have had constituents say to me... let me answer. I have had constituents say to me, I was speaking to one only the other day, who is considering moving out of her property that she's lived in my constituency for over 20 years, and she's going to move up to Scotland because she cannot afford to live in it because of what you're doing. That's the first thing. The second thing is, where are all these people going to move to? The government has admitted there aren't actually enough one-bedroom properties for all these people who are going to have to move into. And the third thing is, this is being done in the name of reducing the social security budget. And I tell you what, the way you reduce the social security budget is actually you get the 2.5 million people that we've got in this country out of work into work. That's a surefire way that you will be able to reduce the deficit and reduce our spending.
As a landlord, our flats are two-bedroom flats, so a lot of our tenants are single tenants. So where are they going to move? Am I going to have to turn my flats into one-bedroom flats?
That's precisely
where
the
are
point
the
I was
one-bedroom flats? There aren't many in Wales.
But you're a private landlord.
Absolutely.
So
they don't get the subsidy anyway.
They
doesn't affect them.
They never have. Well, I'm a private landlord, but they get council housing benefit.
Yeah, but they don't get the subsidy. They will only get it for the number of people. That's the point. That's been the case. Labour never did anything about that.
Where are all the one-bedroom properties that these people are going to move to, Francis? Are there enough? Yes or no?
There's just been a pilot in Wales, right, in Torfaen, looking at what will happen to people when these changes come in. And they found that rent arrears increased from £20,000 to £140,000, which was a seven-fold increase in 7 months. So there's no doubt, is there, that this is going to increase homelessness. And when there aren't the properties for people to move into, what on earth are they going to do?
Okay, you sit up there and I come to Theo. Yes. Who's there?
Yeah, I work as a support worker, and I could think of loads of people I support with. They live in houses with many bedrooms. I mean, I know you've got to lower the deficit, and I agree with all that, but I just think bedroom tax should be scrapped because, I mean, you're scraping the barrel a bit with this, I feel.
It's a bit embarrassing to be sitting and listening to this because you've got intelligent people here in government, debating, and politicians. And the reality is, we're talking about, I think, the total potential saving. I think we're talking about 400 million quid. Assuming you can move everybody, move all the jigsaw pieces around, put all the right people in the right places, and it doesn't take into account the administration costs that's going to go with it. So, on the basis you're never going to do all the pieces in the right places because the properties don't exist in the first place, the reality is you're not going to save any money, but this is just, it just smells of another political PR stunt that makes news out there and isn't going to make any difference to the welfare budget or to the housing stock. It's just another thing that is a distraction from the real issues that we talked about earlier. So we really should bury it and move on.
Well, we'll move on. I think
400 million here, 400 million there.
No, you're not going to get 400 million.
Pretty soon,
You're
Theo.
not going to get 400 million.
Pretty soon, it's serious
theory.
money.
It's George Osborne's theory again. It's a theoretical economy. This is I live in the real world. It doesn't work like that.
All right. We have a. All right. Let's come back to Westminster politics hard. Stephen Sanger, please.
Would the Conservative Party be in better shape to win the next election with Theresa May at the helm?
No. This will be a difficult one for you all. Chuka.
Well, I'm always slightly hesitant when I'm asked this question because I suppose in the last few months of the last Labour government we weren't too sure who our leader should be, but it took us 13 years to get to that point. This is happening 2.5 years in. So I do think there is a major problem here for the Conservative Party, but frankly this kind of Westminster soap opera stuff I don't think people really care about. I think what they're really interested in is there actually going to be a change in policy? Is this going to make a real difference to my life? And I think the problem is Theresa May, George Osborne, David Cameron, they're all signed up to the same failing economic plan, which is doing so much damage to our country.
All right,
and
okay.
it's the
We don't want to go back into that.
Well, I suppose my point
point
is the policies. It's the policies that matter. Right. You know, you can change the heads, but if the policies are the same, what's the difference?
Theo Paphitis.
What's it got to do with me?
You put yourself forward today as a man of the people, a wise man with views based on experience and making a huge profit, and now you can't answer a simple question.
If I could second guess what the Tories would do in choosing a leader. Listen, David Cameron's been a leader for such a short period of time. I mean,
7 years.
7 years. It is.
You mean Prime Minister?
Are you suggesting that he should be changed?
No.
No. What have you with him?
I think he's a very good Prime Minister. I think Theresa May is a very good Home Secretary.
Do you think it was helpful, her speech this week?
She made a very good speech about the things that she does. Yeah, absolutely.
And why did Michael Gove have to intervene, ticking people off in cabinet?
The Prime Minister saw the speech in advance.
What was Michael Gove on about?
I think we're a very strong team.
Yeah, what was Michael Gove on about? Saying people shouldn't start.
David, you've known me far too long to expect me to start blabbing about what goes on behind closed doors.
Somebody did. I don't know whether it was you.
Yeah, but it certainly wasn't me.
Was he ticking off you?
No, sadly, I don't do anything nearly interesting enough to deserve a ticking off.
Kirsty Williams, briefly, you've got this coalition to keep afloat. Do you think you'd do better if it was Theresa May there?
Well, I'm all in favour of more women in high positions in politics, but I don't want to intrude upon the grief of Francis and his colleagues.
I don't feel very grief-stricken.
I think what would happen with Theresa May and the other personalities that are jockeying for position underneath Mr Cameron is that we would see a lurch to the right from the Conservative Party, and I'm glad that we're there trying to hold them back from that.
Okay.
You're saving
Leanne, very briefly, if you would.
Well, I'm not very impressed with the marvellous job that the Liberal Democrats are doing avoiding the Tories shifting to the right. I don't think a change at the top. I don't think the change at the top will make any difference whatsoever. The government will continue with this disastrous cuts programme, which is impacting very badly on working people and is working badly for Wales, and the rich will continue to get richer. I think the Conservatives are a disaster for Wales.
Well, you're way off the question. Yes or no, Theresa May or Cameron?
It makes no difference.
Okay.
Both as bad as each other.
Right, it makes no difference to Plaid Cymru. You could have said that, it saved us a lot of time. But our time's up. We're going to be in York next week, next Thursday, the day after the budget, that is. We'll have politicians here, I don't know who yet, but we'll also have the novelist Anthony Horowitz, the writer of Midsummer Murders and Sherlock Holmes, to play the Theo Paphitis role on the panel. And then after Easter, where there's a pause for 2 weeks, we're going to be in Rochdale, and that's on the 11th of April. So just next week, York, and on the 11th of April, Rochdale. To apply, as you know, this address on the screen, or you can call us, which is 0330 123 9988. My thanks to our panel here, to all of you who came to Cardiff. Until next Thursday from York, when we'll know what the budget contains. From Question Time, good night.
The Bishops and Benefits next tonight, plus the Chris Hume case, and rugby hardman Brian Moore on rivalry in politics and sport. All to come on BBC One with This Week.